The Arctic is becoming one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical battlegrounds. Not Taiwan, not the South China Sea. The Arctic. Russia is reopening Cold War military bases across the far north. China now calls itself a near-Arctic state, despite sitting thousands of kilometers away. NATO countries are rushing troops, submarines, and surveillance systems into frozen territory once considered strategically irrelevant. And this is happening quietly. No daily headlines, no viral breaking news. But underneath the ice, a new great power competition has already begun, because the Arctic contains enormous wealth. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates the region holds 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves. It may also contain nearly 30% of undiscovered natural gas reserves. Then, there are shipping routes. As Arctic ice melts, new sea lanes open between Europe and Asia. Some routes could reduce travel distances by nearly 40% compared to the Suez Canal. That changes global trade dramatically. Whoever dominates the Arctic could influence energy, trade, military positioning, and global supply chains simultaneously. And unlike other flashpoints, the Arctic lacks strong political rules and military balance. That makes the risks even greater. Because the real danger is not only war, it is miscalculation in one of the harshest environments on Earth. For most of modern history, the Arctic remained isolated. Extreme cold limited shipping, construction, and military operations. Only submarines operated there regularly during the Cold War. Back then, the Arctic mainly mattered for nuclear deterrence. American and Soviet submarines hid beneath the ice, carrying nuclear missiles. Then, climate change transformed the region. Arctic sea ice now melts faster every decade. Scientists estimate the Arctic warms roughly 4 times faster than the global average. That creates new economic opportunities. The northern sea route along Russia's coastline now attracts growing commercial interest. The route connects Asia and Europe faster than traditional southern shipping lanes. Meanwhile, governments discovered the Arctic contains enormous mineral, oil, and gas reserves. Suddenly, the region became economically valuable. And once money and strategy entered the Arctic, geopolitical competition followed immediately. Russia expanded military infrastructure rapidly. China increased Arctic investments aggressively. NATO strengthened northern defenses. Finland and Sweden even joined NATO partly because of growing regional insecurity after Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, the Arctic increasingly resembles a strategic chessboard. And Russia currently moves the fastest. No country takes the Arctic more seriously than Russia. Nearly 20% of Russia's GDP comes from Arctic regions. Huge portions of Russian oil and gas infrastructure sit there. That makes Arctic security economically critical for Moscow. Russia also possesses the world's largest fleet of icebreakers. Some are nuclear-powered. Icebreakers matter because they allow ships to operate through frozen waters year-round. America operates only a small fraction of Russia's ice-breaking capability, but the military buildup matters even more. Over the last decade, Russia reopened dozens of Soviet-era Arctic bases. It deployed advanced radar systems, anti-aircraft missiles, and coastal defenses across the region. Satellite images show heavily modernized military facilities stretching across Russia's northern coastline. Moscow also upgraded its northern fleet significantly. That fleet includes nuclear submarines carrying strategic missiles. These submarines remain central to Russia's nuclear deterrence strategy. Why? Because Arctic waters provide excellent hiding space beneath thick ice. Detecting submarines there becomes extremely difficult. That gives Russia strategic protection during crises. And after the Ukraine war isolated Moscow further, Arctic militarization accelerated even faster. But Russia is not the only power moving north aggressively. China now sees massive opportunity in the Arctic too, and Beijing's ambitions surprise many Western governments. China has no Arctic border. Yet Beijing officially describes itself as a near-Arctic state. That phrase alarms many countries immediately, because China clearly sees long-term strategic opportunity there. In 2018, Beijing released an Arctic strategy focused on building a Polar Silk Road. Think of it as the Arctic extension of China's Belt and Road Initiative. China wants future trade routes running through Arctic waters. Why? Because China currently depends heavily on maritime choke points controlled by US allies, especially the Strait of Malacca near Southeast Asia. That creates vulnerability during future conflicts. The Arctic offers potential alternatives. If Arctic shipping becomes commercially reliable, China could bypass vulnerable southern routes partially. Beijing also wants access to Arctic resources. Rare earth minerals, natural gas, and energy reserves matter enormously for advanced industries, especially batteries, semiconductors, and military technology. Chinese companies already invest in Arctic infrastructure, ports, energy projects, and scientific research stations. Officially, these projects focus on science and trade. But Western intelligence agencies increasingly suspect dual-use intentions, meaning civilian projects supporting future strategic goals. China understands something important. The Arctic's political rules remain relatively undeveloped compared to other strategic regions. In simple terms, Beijing sees a chance to gain influence before power structures fully solidify, and China's growing presence forces NATO to respond aggressively, because Western governments increasingly fear losing strategic control in the north. For years, NATO focused heavily on Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Now the alliance pivots north rapidly. Russia's invasion of Ukraine accelerated this shift dramatically. Finland joined NATO in 2023. Sweden followed shortly afterward. That transformed Arctic geopolitics overnight. Now, almost every Arctic country belongs to NATO, except Russia. This gives the alliance major geographic advantages. But it also raises tensions significantly. NATO countries now conduct larger Arctic military exercises regularly. American bombers train in northern Norway. British submarines patrol Arctic waters more frequently. Canada also expands Arctic surveillance systems rapidly. The United States recently updated Arctic military strategies too. In other words, military competition in the Arctic affects far more than ice and territory. It affects trade, communications, energy, and nuclear stability simultaneously, which makes this hidden conflict one of the world's most dangerous long-term rivalries. First, the Arctic will likely become heavily militarized during the next decade. Countries no longer view the region as isolated wilderness. Second, global trade routes could change dramatically. If Arctic shipping becomes commercially viable, countries may rely less on traditional choke points like the Suez Canal. Third, energy competition will intensify further. Countries facing energy insecurity increasingly target Arctic oil and gas reserves. And unlike other flashpoints, Arctic conditions make accidents much more dangerous. A small military incident could escalate rapidly because response times remain slow and unpredictable. The Arctic is no longer remote. Its future could affect global trade prices, energy markets, military tensions, and internet infrastructure worldwide. For centuries, ice protected the Arctic from global power politics. Now melting ice is inviting those power struggles directly into the region. And the countries preparing early may dominate one of the century's most important strategic frontiers.